school shootings, it feels like we hear about them more and more,
Yeah,
But it's so easy for the human side of things to get lost in all the news.
absolutely.
Today, let's take a deep dive into what happened at Abundant Life Christian School
Right.
in Madison, Wisconsin. It's about trying to understand how this event really affected people.
Yeah.
I mean, everyday people, just like you and me.
Right.
We've got news articles, we've got all those live updates from the day it happened, and we've even got some firsthand accounts.
That's always powerful, to hear those personal stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, this case, it doesn't fit the mold.
You're right. It really challenges a lot of the assumptions we might have about school shootings.
So let's get the basics down first. December 16th, 2024, Abundant Life Christian School. Private school, K through 12. Not the kind of place you'd normally think of for this kind of violence.
Yeah, exactly.
The shooter, 15-year-old student, Natalie Rupnow, took her own life, tragically. A teacher and a teenage student were killed, and several others were injured.
Right from the start, you see how this case is different. Private school, young age of the shooter.
Yeah.
And at first, there wasn't even a clear motive.
Yeah.
Makes it even more difficult to grasp,
It does. And it's easy to focus on the big picture, but then you hear a detail that just stops you in your tracks. A second grader called 911.
Wow. A second grader.
I mean, a second grader. Just think about that for a minute.
It's chilling, isn't it? It really shows how deeply this fear is rooted now.
Yeah.
These kids are growing up with active shooter drills right alongside fire drills.
Right.
I can't help but wonder, what does that do to their sense of safety? To their childhood, even?
It's a heavy thought. And speaking of those drills, it's amazing how the students at Abundant Life reacted during the actual lockdown. One school official said they handled themselves, quote, magnificently.
Wow.
They were so composed, even though this time it wasn't a drill.
That's incredible. It speaks to their resilience, to the school's preparedness, but it also makes you wonder, what's the cost of that preparedness? What does it do to have to be ready for something so horrific?
Absolutely. And when you read the firsthand accounts, you really feel the terror and the confusion. Imagine being Courtney Ray, an alumna of the school. She was frantically texting, trying to make sure her 3 younger brothers, Andy, her cousin, were safe.
Oh gosh, can you imagine that feeling? Just waiting, not knowing.
I can't. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize how these events, they reach far beyond the school walls.
They do. They ripple outward, touching so many lives. It's not just contained to that one building.
Exactly. One neighbor, John Diaz de Leon, who saw the evacuation, he said, "This is the last school in Madison you would have thought this would happen."
Powerful statement.
It really shows how this shattered people's sense of security, like that idea that it can't happen here.
Especially in a place like that.
Right. A private Christian school. You think it's safe. You think it's different.
And then
And then something like this happens. And Police Chief Barnes, he was so visibly distressed during the press conferences. You could just tell this wasn't just a job for him. He said, "Today is a sad, sad day. Every person in that building is a victim."
You know what really struck me? He was actually in a training session for this exact scenario, just 3 miles away, when the call came in.
Oh, wow.
It's almost,
Unbelievable.
yeah, like something out of a movie. And the way he talked about school safety, so blunt, so honest. He said he can't guarantee 100% safety and that no police chief can.
That's a tough thing to hear, coming from someone in his position.
It is, but it's the reality we face. It makes you think, in a world where we can't eliminate all the risks, what level of risk are we willing to accept?
That's a big question. And then there's the mystery, the unanswered questions.
They still haven't figured out a motive.
Right.
There's something going around online, some document, but nobody knows if it's real or not. And that just makes things worse, doesn't it? All this not knowing makes people try to fill in the blanks themselves.
It does. You see it with the rumors, like the ones about Natalie's gender identity.
Ah, right.
Chief Barnes actually addressed that in one of the press conferences. He was like, "Hey, everyone, let's be responsible on social media."
Yeah, good for him. That's a really crucial point. Whether Natalie was transgender or not, it really doesn't tell us anything about why this happened.
Exactly.
Jumping to conclusions, especially based on stuff that might not even be true, it just causes more pain. We got to stick to the facts,
Absolutely. Avoid spreading misinformation. That's something we try to do on this show, too.
Definitely. Stay grounded in the facts. No sensationalism, especially with something this sensitive.
Right.
It makes you wonder, even if they DO find a motive,
Yeah.
will it actually help? Will it give anyone any peace? Or will it just make the whole thing even more tragic?
Tough question. But, even with all the darkness, there are these glimmers of hope.
There are.
Yeah. Moments that remind you that people can be good.
That's important to remember. We need those moments
Yeah.
to balance out all the sadness,
Yeah.
to remind us that even after something horrible, people can come together and show compassion.
Like the staff at the school.
Yeah.
They acted so quickly, getting those students to safety. And the first responders rushing into that building, risking their own lives.
And let's not forget the smaller acts of kindness, too. The parents holding their kids tight, friends just listening to each other, people donating blood, sending messages of support.
Those ripple effects, they don't always make the headlines.
They don't, but they matter just as much, maybe even more. They're what hold a community together. It reminds you that even with all the loss, there's still hope.
Yeah.
There's still love. There's still a reason to believe in people. And sometimes you see it in the people who refuse to let this define them, who find a way to make something good come out of it.
Like the students who are already talking about how to honor the victims, wanting to make their school safer, turning their pain into action. Those are the stories we need to hear more of.
They are, because they show us a way forward. They remind us that even in the darkest times, the human spirit, it can endure, it can overcome, it can find a way.
This deep dive, it's been heavy, for sure.
It has.
But it's also been incredibly insightful. We see how resilient people can be, how powerful a community can be, and how important it is to stay informed, to stay engaged.
Absolutely.
But most of all, it reminds us that these tragedies, they're not just statistics. They're real events that affect real people. And we have to do everything we can to prevent them.
We hear a lot about policy changes after these things happen, and those are important. But what about what WE can do?
As individuals.
Yeah, right here, right now, I think that's where real change starts.
Yeah, like what can we actually do? It feels so big sometimes, right?
It does, but it doesn't have to be about finding some big solution, It's more about what can we each do in our own little corner of the world.
I like that, our own little corner of the world.
It's about making a choice every day, choosing kindness instead of judging, really listening to people instead of just waiting for our turn to talk. And trying to understand instead of just assuming things.
Makes sense. So it's about creating a certain kind of
environment.
Yeah, an environment where people feel safe, like they belong.
Exactly. Whether it's at home, at school, in our communities.
Yeah.
A place where you feel like you can be yourself, where you can ask for help if you need it.
And you feel connected to other people, like you're part of something bigger.
That's so important, that feeling of connection.
Right.
Because when you feel alone, when you feel like nobody gets you, that's when things can go really wrong.
It's a long road, isn't it?
It is.
To make that kind of change happen.
There will be bumps along the way. But if we keep that hope alive, if we learn from what's happened, if we work together, maybe we can actually start to make a difference.
This whole deep dive,
Yeah.
It's been tough.
Yeah.
Emotionally. But also, I don't know, it's opened my eyes to a lot of things.
Me too. Like how strong people can be, even when the worst happens.
And how much communities can do to support each other. And how important it is to stay informed, to keep talking about these issues.
Yeah, to not just look away.
Right. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is these tragedies, they're not just numbers. They're not just headlines. They're real people.
Absolutely. Real lives lost. Real families shattered.
We can't forget that. And we can't let ourselves become numb to it.
Exactly. We have to keep fighting for change.
So we spent this time talking about Abundant Life Christian School, but it's really about so much more than that one event. It's about the human impact, the ripple effects.
How it touches everyone, even if they weren't directly involved.
It leaves you with a lot to think about, and hopefully with a feeling that we can do something, even if it's small.
I think that's the key. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to solve everything overnight.
Just start somewhere. Do something. Anything.
Because even the smallest act of kindness,
it can have a ripple effect.
It can. And who knows how far those ripples might spread.
So that's it for this deep dive. I hope it's given you some things to think about.
And
maybe inspired you to go out there and make a difference. Even a small one.